thing with repetition is, repetition builds muscle memory, but if you repeat the same thing over and over again wrong, you'll just build bad habits.
I'm so happy to have today's guest back on the podcast for a second time. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we are chatting with renowned performance coach Don Greene. Dr. Don Greene. He was on the podcast a couple years ago, and my longtime co-host, John Grillo, who helped me kick this thing off over a decade ago, he and I sit down with Don for a round two, and boy, do we get into some interesting topics. I love round twos. In the first episode, which we've got linked up to, by the way, we go over Don's backstory and how he got into working with musicians, which is a fascinating story. Listen to it if you haven't. But we dig into new territory today in this conversation, and we talk about his TED Ed video, Don's TED Ed video with over 25 million views. Whoa! And a fantastic description on how the brain wires itself throughout the learning process. And we also dig into all sorts of other great topics, mental rehearsal, centering, Don's new project, College Prep for Musicians, very interesting, many other topics. And I'd like to give a shout out to our sponsors, Colstein Music, Upton Bass, Steve Swan String Bass, The Bass Violin Shop, and D'Addario Strings. More on them later in the episode. But let's dive into today's conversation with my longtime co-host, love this guy, John Grillo, and Don Greene. I'm on the line with John Grillo, my longtime co-host, and we are just about to give Don Greene a call. How's it going today, John?
Hey, Jason. Good afternoon. This is awesome. I'm so excited to have podcast interview number 2 with Don Greene.
Yeah, and I think we were the first podcast appearance for Don. He's been on some others since then, and he's got all kinds of new projects going. And I just can't wait to dig into his TED video about how to practice effectively and all these new projects. It's just, what an inspiring guy. I learn so much every time I read about what he's doing or listen to him or watch him.
Yeah, totally. And especially, look how important that is for musicians, how to practice effectively. We spend most of our time, by ourselves practicing. So
it's going to be good.
Hello, Don. Good afternoon. It's great to have you back on the program.
Thanks, Don. It's a pleasure to be back.
Yeah. And I think today it would be great if we could, I would like to start, to get into an in-depth discussion, focusing on the TED video and congratulations on 25 million views. That's really awesome. I just saw that on the website. Yeah, it's tremendous. So we sort of, we touched on it in our introductory podcast. We covered a lot of your history and stuff. So I think what we could do today, we get really into just the, super laser focus into the, however you want to take it into, the myelination and that's those sort of contemporary topics of, that muscle memory is not what we thought of, and how the, with the neurons and the myelination and all that kind of stuff. So, however you would like to start that, but it's just practicing. It's just fascinating to me that the concept that we touched on this last time, how muscles really just contract and release, and it's really the nervous system that takes over our emotions.
Well, this comes out of a TED animation on how to practice effectively for just about everything. And it starts, with a picture of a bass player practicing.
Awesome.
Yeah. But it certainly applies to bass, but it applies to everything, involving complex motor skills that need to be performed well under pressure. So the concept of muscle memory is a concept because, as you said, muscles have no memory. They just fire and release. It's the neuromuscular connections, the connection between our nerves and muscles, the information track going from the brain, with a signal of what to do, and then going through the neurons, a series of neurons, all the way to the muscles, telling them when to fire and when not to fire. And every time you make a repetitive motion, as in a bowing motion or a fingering motion, and the impulse travels from the brain, say, to the fingers, that around those connections, those neurons, those chains, those series of neurons, every time the impulse travels in the same pattern through those neuromuscular pathways, those pathways get strengthened by myelin, which is a white fatty substance that surrounds those neurons. And every time we repeat the motion, that insulation around the neurons, those chains, gets layered, another sheath around those neurons. And more sheaths, the more repetitions, the more insulated, the quicker the impulses travel from the brain down to the fingers. And after many, many, many 10,000 hours, if you will, those pathways become just super highways that you just think it and it just happens almost instantaneously as it quickly travels down those pathways. And that's what builds what's so-called muscle memory, those habit patterns that you can do certain complex things without conscious thought. And that's one of the main reasons for effective practice, so you can do it, especially under pressure, without conscious thought. That all makes sense?
Yeah, and it's interesting because in the old school method of playing music, it was almost like, that sort of no pain, no gain approach, just hammer away at it physically, with the concept being that, then the muscles will just remember it. But I guess what this all comes back to, when you said when you think it just happens, so you think and play great. That's what I told Jason. That's one of the phrases I use a lot. So when you do that, but also when it starts in the brain, I think should we just start in the brain and then work down? Because it would be cool to kind of see how this works over a period of time, like playing a 5-minute piece. So so it starts in the brain. It starts with right brain and left brain.
Well, it starts in both, because you've got to certainly start with an understanding in the left brain of technique and phrasing and music theory and understanding conceptually how to do it. Technique certainly needs to be there, and then a shift to the right brain where you can hear it properly in your head and see correct movements in your fingers and feel those motions in your body. The thing with repetition is, repetition builds muscle memory, but if you repeat the same thing over and over again wrong, you'll just build bad habits. And that's why it's important not to just go through repetitions mindlessly by rote without conscious awareness, but by practicing with full mindfulness of what you're doing, so it's as close to correct as you can, so you're building in good habits, you're building in good muscle memory, because you can just as well build in bad muscle memory of bad habits, and then under pressure, they'll surface. So the idea is to practice mindfully with your repetition.
So the big difference, like what you focus on, so when the pressure comes, so where does that make people fall off the cliff then? Because the pressure comes, is it the words that goes back to our self-talk and the language? Is it what we've done in the practice room that comes up that's wrong? I know it's a complex combination of all of this, but usually you always hear students say, well, in the practice room, so before you go out on stage, everything feels fine. Then they go out on stage, and then that's your sort of class, which I think you spend so much time helping people try to, under pressure, then go back to those, that sort of practice performance continuum type thing.
Yeah, the practice performance continuing thing. You build in the habits in practice so you can trust them under pressure, namely not overthink them or think them consciously. So here's how it works. You practice and build those habits in 10,000 hours or 1,000,000 repetitions of scales and arpeggios. So a quote goes into your muscle memory or into your neuromuscular programming with certainly reinforced myelin, lots of myelin surrounding those correct pathways. So the reason to do that is to build it into implicit memory, namely the memory of being able to do it without consciously thinking about doing it. It's built into your neuromuscular pathways. So the idea is that because of that, you earn the right to trust it, to allow your body to do it without constant micro intervention of overthinking every little piece of the puzzle of playing. When people are learning a new motor skill, whether it's baseball or playing the bass, they have to do it through explicit memory and left brain. They need to learn the parts and pieces step by step, one at a time, thinking through it in left brain, with technique, with understanding, with cognitive reinforcement, to build in explicit memory so you can do it, but you can do it through conscious thought, namely every step of the way. And that looks like, for a student, that's how students learn. And that's why students look robotic, staccato, because it's just a series of left brain steps that they consciously need to think through every step of the way. But through constant repetition over many, many years, spaced repetition, correct practice, those habits go into implicit memory. Namely, they happen without the conscious thought intervention of the left brain. You just hear the sound in your head, and that's what should come out of your instrument, unless conscious thought gets in the way. That's another reason for all the repetition, so you have the right to trust it under pressure and not think it, but to allow it, to hear it in your head and allow your body to do what it knows how to do very well because of the repetition without the conscious thought. And that works very well in the practice room. And that's why people practice and sound very good in the practice room, because there's no pressure. They want to start again, they can start again or play with a metronome or make sure it's in tune. And that's good for practicing practice and to build in implicit memory. So under pressure, not in the practice room, but on stage, they can trust their neuromuscular programming and allow their body to do it without conscious intervention of their left brain telling them how to do it, like they were a student. They don't need that. They need to trust their implicit memory. So they go out on stage and they realize that they only have one take. This is important. They're under pressure. And if they don't trust their neuromuscular programming and override it and start thinking consciously about what they need to do, they shift from right brain trusting, allowing, hearing, and doing to left brain thinking and telling them how to do it. So they go back to explicit memory, namely they need to think about it like they were a high school student or elementary school student, just learning all those steps one by one consciously, and all of a sudden they revert to that and start playing in that fashion. As soon as they start playing that way and feeling what their body feels like, which is not good, they're not going to hear good sounds. It's not going to sound good. It's not going to feel good. And they're going to hear it. And they're not going to like it. And then they're going to try to figure their way out of this, which goes more into explicit memory. And more than that, it employs the prefrontal cortex, the most advanced form of the human brain, the prefrontal cortex. This is where we do executive functioning, planning, thinking ahead, analyzing. How do I solve this problem? And it goes pure left brain and prefrontal cortex, executive functioning with what's called liquid intelligence. Intelligence on the fly to figure out, mostly cognitively, how to solve this problem, this terrible thing I'm in the middle of, because it's sounding worse and worse. And then it, unfortunately, can lead into a downward spiral and a train wreck. That's what causes athletes and musicians to choke. That's the mechanism of choking. It's basically from not trusting implicit memory, of trusting their neuromuscular programming that they work so hard to put in there, and then to come under pressure and do just the opposite and not trust it. It doesn't make any sense, but that's what causes choking. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and then that's why the centering. That's why centering is so key to your. That's always been such a key element to your teaching, right?
That's why centering is such an important strategy for musicians and athletes to learn and master, because it directly counteracts the choking mechanism, because it's intended to bring full awareness to both breathing and then muscle tension, which is a main thing that happens under pressure and that causes problems. And then more importantly, it's shifting from left brain to right brain, to hearing the music in a very focused way, and then fairly quickly, without hesitation, of allowing that sound and the energy of a performance to go uninterrupted by conscious thought. That's why centering is so important. And after a musician learns how to center, they can do that in less than 10 seconds and dramatically alter the normal effects that produce choking.
Now, could you touch on that? It was 5 steps. Are you still at 5 steps, or is this advanced? Or
It's a learning process. It starts out with 7 steps, and then after going through the 7 steps and practicing them, learning them, then it goes to 5 steps, and then progressively again over time moves to 3 steps, and eventually just basically one breath, and you can get centered. But that takes several weeks to reach that level. But after that, you can do it very quickly.
This is fascinating. And then, so what that really is doing is that's destroying this whole concept of the neural pathways and the myelination, then, right? Or not destroying, but it's just interfering with that explicit memory.
Well,
I mean, it was interesting how, like, on a physiological level, how does that? So we have, the ideal performance with our neural pathways and, all our 10,000 hours of the way we want it to sound, and then it's almost like a sabotaging that.
Well, what sabotages that is a conscious thought of kicking back into explicit memory of how to do this, like you were teaching a beginner. And if you think like that, you'll play like a beginner. Here's the thing. Besides the thought, there's the element of fear. Because one of the main differences between a practice room and being on stage is fear.
Right.
And we can think in left brain words, analysis, explicit memory, and right brain, but that's not the source of fear. The source of fear is the limbic system, the reptilian brain, the basic rudimentary parts of our brain, the reptilian brain, because that's the emotional brain. We have a rational brain, both left brain and right brain are involved in conscious thought, but we have a fear base as the limbic system. And what happens is we are normally rational human beings and make decisions hopefully rationally most of the time. But under extreme conditions of fear or extreme stress, the limbic system, the fear base, can override the rational system. Under extreme cases, because we are hardwired like cavemen, no matter how well ingrained, if the fear kicks in and we go into fight, flight, or deer in the headlights, it will override that system and a rational system. And this is what happens in Los Angeles, I know, on major highways, especially on Friday afternoons. Let's say one person is leaving to go home after a tough week at work, and the other person just got promoted to partner of his law firm, and he can't wait to get home to celebrate with his family. And they get stuck on the 405 in traffic. One guy cuts the other guy off. They exchange gestures, and before long, one guy pulls out a .357 Magnum, shoots the other guy. One guy goes to the hospital with a funeral home, and the other guy goes to jail because the emotional system briefly overrode the rational system. And unfortunately, this happens all the time. It happens so often we have common terms for these things. We call it going postal or road rage or intermittent explosive disorder. It's when the emotional limbic system overrides the rational system. Implicit and explicit memory, neuromuscular programming, and causes disasters. And that's the other part of choking, because people, without a strategy for dealing with the pressure, tend to freak out and help in the choking process.
So that's why at the end of the basketball game, there's no time left. You have 2 foul shots. Most of the time they just tank those. I always use that with my students. I mean, if it was the beginning of if it was the second minute of the game, all right. If I miss it, all right, whatever. I think but see, as artistic people in the arts, though, we're so emotional. We love our craft. I think sometimes with auditions, I think we sometimes kind of go ahead. Oh, if I only had this and I got the opera role, right? Or if I won this bass spot, we're so sort of as artistic. Some of us as artistic people are so emotional, because we love the craft so much. I guess that's the same in athletics and stuff and Olympic athletes. So.
It's a little bit different. I think one of the wonderful parts of music is the ability to convey complex emotions or a series of emotions, different emotions, through beautiful music. That's why I love opera. I go there and cry. It touches people emotionally. And you're in the business of producing that effect. However, that does not mean if you're playing a sad piece, you should be crying. You need to be emotionally in control. The audience can sit there and cry. They paid for it and they earn the right to do it, but you're being paid to cause them to have the emotional experience. And to do that, you cannot indulge too much in your own emotions, especially fear. And that's why it's very important that you train and work at strategies like centering and building courage so that you can override the fear emotion, not with beautiful sounds, but with focus and paying attention to what you're doing in spite of the emotions that you may be feeling. This is, again, where the rational needs to override the emotional. You can feel great looking forward to beforehand, enjoy it afterwards, and celebrate wonderful music at after hours parties, after concerts. But during it, it's business. Does that help or not?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. That makes me just think of negative how you were talking about positive reinforcement versus negative reinforcement. I mean, over the long term. I remember you were working with those opera singers that they were so just terrified they couldn't even just get on stage. And you said at the same time you were working with the divers that were jumping off, 40-foot platforms, right? I remember that. You told them. I mean.
I've since come to a greater appreciation of how scary singing high notes are.
Samuel Colstein, who founded Colstein & Sons back 70 years ago at this point, Sam was largely self-taught. Here's Barry Colstein about how his father got into the business.
It was mainly self-taught,
Yeah.
but I will pay homage to people that need to be paid homage. He did study a bit with Al Eisenstein, who was a great repairman in Manhattan. He was considered one of the top. And Al was very gracious. He allowed my father to sit at his side, watch him work. But a lot of it was self-taught. My father was a very ingenious person. He really would look at a problem and figure out 5 ways of doing it and then choose the right way always.
Ever since those early years, Colstein & Sons has been working to solve problems for bass players, provide them with ever better instruments and new opportunities in terms of travel basses and cases and all sorts of things that we need as bass players. Thank you, Barry, and thank you, Colstein, for everything that you do and for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by Steve Swan String Bass. Steve has been active in the bass world and also the guitar world for years. Here's a bit from our live podcast taping with Steve on how he got into that business.
Guitars and basses.
Guitars and basses.
Okay, how did that happen?
They're both helper instruments. I've always played the rhythm guitar, quite often with bass lines moving, either in swing style, jazz style, or country style. Bass is the same thing, supporting the band, the group of people you're playing with. So I've always felt like I was a support person.
I love how Steve describes being a support person, and he is certainly that for the bass community here on the West Coast, here in the San Francisco Bay Area. His shop is located just south of San Francisco, and he has a large retail showroom with about 70 basses on display. And these basses are professional, top-of-the-line basses. These basses are student-level basses and everything in between. They're beautifully set up. So if you're looking for a bass or you know someone who is, be sure to check out Steve at steveswanstringbass.com. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast, Steve.
I'm Jory Herman, and I'm one of the newest members of the Los Angeles Philharmonic double bass section. Last year, I began using the Diodario Kaplan strings and really love how they sound and what they can do. As a young bassist, my first memories of playing the instrument were actually on the Diodario Helicore strings, so you could say that I've been using Diodario products since about 1994. Throughout college and my early professional life, I tried many different types and gauges of strings, and even experimented with mixing and matching from different sets. I would put 3 strings from one set with the lowest string from another, or maybe just change out the top string or do half and half, but never was really fully committed to the entire set from a single brand. Kaplan strings, however, do everything that you need them to. They have a crisp articulation while remaining warm and resonant from top to bottom across all strings. They have an immediate and clear response without maxing out in the loudest section of the music, all while still being delicate and singing in the softest sections of the music. All around, they're an incredible set of strings for the orchestra bass section.
It's interesting, but I think that's why, over how we've been working with people, it just has made a big effect. And I think we mentioned this before that, so much, or if you want to touch on this a little bit, how, you was sort of, brought this to our industry where there wasn't that much of this training. Maybe if you got lucky, you had a teacher that was kind of into this kind of stuff, but,
Right.
They really filled a gap in that. But people were going through these full programs of these major music schools, and I think it was that sort of through the rejection and whether you had a good teacher relationship or not. Or
John, the problem is that there are still the vast majority of conservatories and music schools in the U.S. and the world do not offer this kind of training. I think it's extremely unfortunate for the students and even the faculty, to spend so much of their lives and money and energy and caring to put so much in on one level, namely the physical, technical level, and almost ignore the mental level of it's not about performing music in a practice room or even in a teacher's studio. They don't pay a lot of money for that. This is about performing under pressure. And the vast majorities of schools in the U.S. do not teach that skill. It's unbelievable to me. Most every Olympic team, now more professional athletic teams, have at least one sports psychologist on staff. And music schools are still thinking this, that's a nice concept. But, we teach that. Our teachers teach that. They might, but they're not trained to teach that. And that's not their primary thing any more than that's why I don't teach bass.
Right, or bass guitar, right? No, I'm just kidding.
I have the basic concepts. It's about 1 and 5, and it's minor, it's third. But that's about it. I know there's huge shifts, and it's important to have smooth going. But I don't know.
I do this in the symphony sometimes. Like if we're playing a really hard piece, everybody's getting their butt kicked, and then someone has a big solo, I'll walk up to them. I'll say, there's no such thing as muscle memory. And usually sometimes I get kind of an angry look, or they're friends of mine, but I still think to a classical musician, that concept, when they hear that, they're going to sort of reject that. I mean, a large percentage. I mean, without, now we have your video and this work, and, now there's scientific evidence that this is the case. But, I mean, maybe that's sort of the crusade. It's like the anti-muscle memory crusade. Maybe I should dedicate my life to that. Because I think that's where it starts. Because if you say musicians were so ingrained from I could see it. My daughters take piano lessons, I could see it because one day she made a mistake and she just flinched. She looked up at me. She went, "Daddy." I can't get into this now. They're too young for that. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, I think it's just hard to. Jason, don't you think with your students? I don't know. It's so ingrained into the classical. I don't know if that's in other art form. I mean, other musician forms, but probably not so much in rock and roll and stuff. But.
It's, from my perspective, certainly, it's ingrained, and it's really cool to see how Don, and especially, and we can get into this in a bit, but kind of getting into the college prep thing and moving this training to an earlier age. I mean, it's so crucial. It's much better than it was, obviously, with Don's work, but there's still a long way to go.
Don, could we touch on visualization a little bit? Because I like in the video, you could even use, because I'm sure a lot of people listening will watch the video, like with the basketball players. Was that the 2-week study?
Sure.
Because I think visualization then comes into, that's part of our sort of faith and, fighting, the fear, where you do have so many of those mental repetitions and what is usually the same outcome.
John, there's countless research studies showing how visualization improves motor performance. Lots of them are from basketball, where they basically break random groups into two. One group's practices free throws, a half hour a day for 2 months. The other group doesn't go into the gym. They just mentally rehearse throwing free throws. And, and the results always come out about the same, that the physical practice only group tends to improve, just a little bit better than the mental group, the visualization group. But it's amazing because that's without any physical practice whatsoever. And the research shows that the best results are obtained by both mental and physical practice, a combination of both. Certainly not 50-50, more like 80-20, that you certainly practice and do scales, arpeggios, everything, but you make visualization of mental rehearsal an important part of that, because there's also studies showing that mental rehearsal and visualization accelerates the learning process. So especially with physical instruments like the bass, you can only do so much physical practicing. And the more you practice, especially after a certain point, you tend to set up mistakes. And all of those mistakes register in your subconscious and your self-confidence. And I truly believe that rather than starting out practice every day or any concert, any performance, that you go through it mentally first. The common term is visualization, because it comes from athletes with very visual sports. Basketball shooting, you need to see it and do it. But other physical sports, athletic sports that are very visual, like gymnastics, figure skating.
Skiing, right? Remember you see those guys with like downhill skiing?
Yeah, those are very visual sports. But music is not that. Music is not about visual, it's about sound and the feelings associated in your body with producing that sound. Because you can play your instrument with your eyes closed. And it really doesn't matter how you look, and I know there's different ways to hold the bow, but it really doesn't matter how it looks, how you hold the bow. It matters how you sound and how it feels holding the bow that way. So I don't use the term visualization with musicians. I do with athletes. But with musicians, I use the term mental rehearsal, because it's not a visual thing as much as a auditory kinesthetic thing of hearing the sound you intend to produce and then feeling how to produce that in your body, in your muscle memory. So I recommend, before you do anything, go through it in your head first. Make sure it's correct in your head rather than just jump into it, especially if you're not fully warmed up or ready to go, and start stepping on it and making mistakes and having to correct those mistakes. I ask my musicians to put index cards on their practice while saying, imagine it first. There's no sense in picking up the instrument and proving that it's not right in your head first. Take a few moments, center, bring your mind into the present, close your eyes, hear the sounds you like to produce or just your normal warm-up sounds. Feel your hands, body producing those sounds until it sounds right and then feels right. And if that takes 10 seconds or 10 minutes, that's what I'd recommend you start with. And get in the habit of doing that and working through kinks in your head rather than with the instrument in your hand. You'll save time and wear and tear on the body. Because there's an overuse syndrome with musicians, and especially bass players and the big movements you have to make, with overuse syndrome and doing damage to your body by playing too much. And a lot of that is to work through problems when you could do it mentally and get in your head right first. So that's one part. And then you extend that to, working through pieces, working through tough things and pieces you haven't even tried yet. Do it in your head first. Before a lesson, make sure you go through it just how you intend the lesson to go with contingencies, always with contingencies. You plan it out as well as you can first. But if the teacher asks for this instead of that, well, mentally rehearse that so you're not caught off guard and given a blindsided by something you didn't anticipate. This is another use of mental rehearsal. You can go through all sorts of contingencies, and then you take it to performance situations of imagining the performance of the recital or the audition, going exactly how you would like it to go, hearing it, feeling it, and seeing it, all the way through, again with contingencies. If they ask for this excerpt versus that excerpt, or the concerto first, fine, you've gone through every permutation in your head pretty easily without any wear and tear on your body. I think mental rehearsal is a very unused skill by athletes and musicians. Athletes use it a lot more than musicians. It came as a shock to me when I got into the musical community, and I found out, that a lot of musicians didn't make good use of this. Some of them didn't even know how to do it or why to do it or to do it at all. And then I found out that some really competent musicians, professional musicians, couldn't imagine it the way they wanted it to sound. In particular, there's a really good instrumentalist who was well-trained. He was professional, been to all the good schools. His father's a music teacher, high school music teacher. This guy checked off all the technical, physical boxes, but he still wasn't happy with how he sounded. So he went to a hypnotist. And the hypnotist said, well, just lay down, I'll hypnotize you. And I want you to just imagine, 8 bars, just the way you'd like them to sound. So he hypnotized him, lays him down, and he says, when you're happy with the sound, just raise your finger to tell me that you're happy. So he hypnotizes him, and he's waiting and waiting and waiting. And after about 10 minutes, he says, are you still awake? And he holds up his hand and says, I still can't get the first bar. So he puts him back in hypnosis. And to make a long story short, after 2 or 3 sessions with the hypnotist, he still couldn't hear concertos in his head and feel in his body the way he'd like it to sound. And he struggled with this for years until we got together and we went through this, and he learned how to center, learned how to mentally rehearse, and now he teaches his students how to do it.
You know what, Don? I think that's an excellent point. We said, but since we're musicians, that it's an auditory versus visual. Because I've heard a lot of musicians say like they've tried to do visualization, but something about it just doesn't click. That must be the reason.
it's one reason, but it's also a skill that needs to be learned with the correct information and practice. When I was 9 years old, I was a springboard diver in New York. I was practicing at Columbia University. And on a low board, I was trying to do a front 1.5. Now, I practiced on the trampoline, where you do a front flip and then you land, flat on the trampoline. And I practiced that for years. And then when I started diving, I had trouble not repeating that motion, and I was landing flat on my stomach, which is not fun or good. And one of the college divers said, well, just picture yourself, doing it right, landing on your head. And every time I closed my eyes and pictured, I just saw myself landing flat on my face. I thought, this is stupid. I'm not going to do that anymore. So I didn't. And for the next 10, 11 years that I dove, I never used it. I wish I would have. I struggled without it. And it wasn't until graduate school, when I started talking about it, that I was thinking, well, maybe it's not a bad idea. But I didn't pay that much attention to it even then, until after I graduated. I was with the Olympic team, the Olympic diving team, or the Mission Viejo diving team, preparing for the Olympic trials. And one of the divers on the team, a young 16-year-old, was doing a back 2.5 off 10 meter, 33 feet up, 100 feet down. And she got a really bad takeoff off the platform. And she landed flat on her back on the water at 35 miles an hour. And we thought she broke her back. And after we took her out of the water on a stretcher and took her for x-rays and found out she was okay, she wanted to know if she could still dive in the Olympic trials in 2 months. And the orthopedic surgeon said that he didn't know, maybe, but she couldn't practice. So for 2 months, she didn't practice one dive, except in her mind. And that whole time, I took her through visualization, if you will, mental rehearsal, of doing not just that dive, all the other dives and all the practice dives and the lead-up dives, trampoline work, dry land work, everything the other divers were doing to keep her mind in it, to make her believe that she was doing it. And that's what we did for 2 months until we went to the Olympic trials and did it for another week in the training room, because she still couldn't dive until the final day of the competition, when the orthopedic surgeon said she could do 8 dives, the 8 dives she needed to do to qualify. She hadn't dove in 2 months. And imagine not playing your bass for 2 months and then stepping into a metal audition like, here you are. And you won't get seriously physically hurt no matter how bad you do on a bass, but you can get seriously hurt off a 33-foot platform. The wild thing is, she hit her first dive, and the second dive and the third dive, while other divers were hitting and missing. I mean, Olympic champions, world champions. This was a 16-year-old girl who never won much at all. After 5 rounds of diving, she was leading the competition, because in her mind, she hadn't missed a dive in her mind in 2 months. All the other divers had missed a lot of dives, including even in practice. Practice warm-up before the event. Before the event, she just saw more good dives. She was leading after 6 rounds. On the 7th round, she slipped a little bit on the platform, and it wasn't the diver we were saving for last. She slipped, and she went in at enough of an angle that the orthopedic surgeon examined her and said she couldn't do her last dive. But I truly believe she would have nailed that last dive, and she would have been the story of the Olympics. And that made me a true believer in the power of mental rehearsal. And ever since then, I've used it a lot. And I think it's just an incredible tool, especially for musicians, to make as a part of their daily routine, and especially as they're getting ready for big events, because, before big concerts or certainly auditions, people out of insecurity and out of making mistakes physically tend to overplay and play too much And the essential part of preparing athletes and musicians for big events is tapering. That is backing off the intense level of practicing and playing over and over and over. And you make up for that time and practicing with mental rehearsal and going through those pieces and all the contingencies of what might happen at the recital or the concert or the audition that you can go through in your head without physically practicing. And that's again why I'm just a big proponent of this. And I was a skeptic for many years of my life.
What is an American style of bass? Here's Gary and Eric from Upton Bass on the topic.
So there's a joke about American instruments, all right? If I can take 4 violins and go to, let's say, a top-notch violin appraiser, and he can take the first one out and look at it and go, well, this one's clearly Italian because of all these features. Next one, oh, this is French because of all these features. Next one, no, this is English because of these features. 4th violin, they can't tell what it is, and then they go, it's American. It's got a little bit of everything.
Learn more about their Bostonian, American-style model and so many other things that they have to offer you at uptonbass.com. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by the Bass Violin Shop, which opened in 2001 as a small double bass workshop in Greensboro, North Carolina. Today, they're staffed by 3 full-time, highly skilled bass luthiers, and they specialize in double bass sales, rentals, setup, restoration, and repair. For nearly 20 years, they have satisfied thousands of clients by offering quality instruments, knowledgeable service, reliable repairs, and superior restorations at affordable prices. They proudly offer the largest variety of fine basses and bows in the Southeast. You can find something at every price point by makers such as Thomas Martin, Bill Lakeberg, Romano Solano, Lemur Music, all Shen models, K, Epiphone, and bows by Louis Morizot, Fuchs, Nürnbergo, Arcos Brazil, and others. For more information and current inventory, visit their website at bassviolinshop.com and be sure to follow them on Facebook and Instagram.
Don, I like when you use the term contingency, because I remember one thing you said once was like that in the Olympics, like they go for 97%. Like, is this whole thing in music where we're going for like the 100% perfect routine is almost like unrealistic?
Yeah, it's totally perfectionism in sports and especially music is dysfunctional. It's unattainable. It's a bad goal. The whole goal is striving for excellence, of doing your best. It's a hard enough thing to do to play the bass in tune, tempo, correct phrasing, etc., just by itself, let alone under extreme pressure. And an audition or recital, whatever it is, when it really counts. And if you try to play perfectly under those situations, you will self-destruct. It doesn't work. There's too many parts and pieces, too many notes involved. How many notes? How many notes in an average length audition? And considering that they're just not black dots on the page, there's nuances and vibrato and fingerings and nuances and phrasings and all this stuff. And you figure out the number of notes in a regular audition or the ring cycle. We're talking thousands and thousands. And do you think you're going to hit 10,000 out of 10,000 under pressure? No way. So my objective is to get musicians to understand this, and the goal is the optimal zone. Ideal considering the circumstances. This is an audition. This is a recital. If you don't pass this recital, you may need to repeat another year of school. This is consequential. You need some person with that pressure, and that's why I call it 93 to 97 optimal zone. That if you just miss a certain thing or it doesn't go well, it's fine. Let the other people try to be perfect and tilt on that one bauble, that one mistake, and that's where you'll go past people that are better technically or maybe physically better prepared that aren't prepared to play anything less than perfect. It's a losing strategy.
So you go 7% down, even down to 93%.
93 wins auditions, believe me.
It's funny because I think that's another thing we talked about negative reinforcement. Like because now as a professional, I don't know, I've come to the point where you kind of get over that. You know, you see, you come in and measure early, or what, like everybody, conductors always make everybody always makes some mistake. You know, but I think that's what caused some of that fear. Like we were talking back in the beginning, like you get up to play, and then that, you know, what you call it, the self sabotage, right? Or where you said, you know, that with the reptilian brain and stuff.
Sure.
Oh no, I'm gonna miss one note. So. And
then you missed a note.
Which is interesting when you say that it's auditory. Like I think that's you know, this is an auditory medium too. I mean, like
my question to you and everybody in your audience. Can you take the most challenging piece of your repertoire or concerto and close your eyes and hear it from beginning to end as you feel in your body and play it and make it sound exactly how you would like it to sound? And in this way, you can go for a 99. Can you do it? Or even 97? Can you do your whole concerto and hear it and feel it exactly how you like it to sound at the level of 95 or 97? Can you do that or not? It's as simple as that.
Right. Well, I had that experience last year. I mean, I was playing Per Questa Bellamano. Jason, you remember, I have a recording of that on. I've done that several times. That's our hardest piece in our repertoire. But I just said I was not going to just play it that much. Jason, remember you? I was saying that? I mean, yeah, I have piano rehearsals, and it was also the third or fourth time I played it. But I did make mistakes in the concert, but...
Everybody makes mistakes in a concert.
But the interesting thing is, but I think after we talked about that thing where I really internalized that, like, if you get past that first thing where if we could change the paradigm to that, the muscles just, I mean, I think that's that's a revolutionary stage right there, because then it doesn't matter, right? I mean, then you're into what I'm just saying what you're saying, but when you get into the fact that it's in your mind. And you hear the sound that you want to, almost to keep it really simple. What you're saying doesn't even sound that it's not that complex. I mean, physically it's complex. I'm saying just as a progression of steps, right? I mean, even in the Olympics, you try to keep it where it's just.
Mistakes are inevitable in classical music. It's too challenging a thing to expect perfection. It's about how you handle the mistakes. I just think of javelin, and the last javelin thrower I worked with before he qualified for the Olympics. In javelin, you have 5 throws. After 4 throws, he had fouled on 2 and had not good throws on the other 2. So he was behind, and he knew he had to pop it. At the back of the runway, in addition to centering, I saw him smirk. I'd never seen this guy smirk before. He had a master's degree in mechanical engineering from Dartmouth. Talk about left brain cognitive. Okay, his job when he was not at the training center, he was working for Raytheon. This is about the brightest guy I'd ever met. At the back of the runway, I saw him center and then smirk and then run down the runway and just pop it. 82 meters. He qualified for the games in Rio. After the press and after all the signed autographs and all, I said, "What were you thinking?" And he said, "You know, in this grand scheme, it just really doesn't matter. So I just had 4 bad throws. It doesn't matter." And you know, he could have analyzed those throws. Believe me, biomechanically, he could dissect every movement of his rotator cuff. He just shifted that left brain into the right brain, and the idea of it. It's not going to be perfect. It's never a perfect throw. There's never a perfect javelin throw. There's never a perfect dive. There's never a perfect concerto. And if you can accept that and strive for excellence, which is the motto of my website, you've got a path to go. Strive for excellence. Do your best. Best, namely, considering the situation. This is the Olympic trials. If you fault on this throw, you're going home. You're not going to Rio. Simple as that. So he just had 4 bad thoughts. Doesn't matter. Have fun. Play. That's the other concept of this with the lack of perfectionism. The concept is you play music. You work music in a practice room. You go out on stage, the idea, audition even. You play music. Just like you play sports. Play golf. Not work golf, that's for the driving range. Go out and play golf.
Isn't it interesting how we lose sight of that word that's right there, baked into our art form?
No, that's all because the music.
Play, right? Yeah, it's like a toy. It should be like a toy. You know, the kids play. You want to play, you know.
Yeah, but the music schools, the conservatories, in a rightful way, take some of that play because this is serious stuff. But now, hopefully, you can realize it's too important to take too seriously. There needs to be a play element in there, just like kids playing. And after you learn the skills in music school and apply them, you reach a point where you can play music. Because that's what people want to hear. They want to hear you work. They want to hear playfulness. They want to hear joy. They want excitement, energy. That's playfulness. That's not work.
There's a bass player, assistant principal of the Philadelphia Orchestra, Joe Conyers. John and I both know him. Joe was describing his audition to me for Philadelphia, and he said he was basically laughing behind the screen. He was having so much fun, which sounds insane to some people, but it just reinforces that concept of play.
That was on our interview, right?
That's
Jason,
right.
We interviewed him, right?
That's right. We did. So Don, I got to ask. So college prep for musicians.
Yes.
Talk about this new project. It's so cool that you're doing this. Tell us about the book and the website and just what you're up to with this.
It's so exciting. It's with Annie Bosler and also Dr. Kathleen Tezar. Kathy Tezar was in charge of admissions at the Coburn School, and 2 years ago she took over the job at Juilliard. She's in charge of everybody applying for admissions into Juilliard. So the three of us have spent the last 3 years writing this book of helping high school kids, their parents, their teachers, and counselors understand how to navigate the complicated labyrinth and puzzle of getting into a top music school or conservatory. And it's, all you guys know, it's an intricate process. Nobody's ever really written a roadmap for how to do it. And it's a very complicated roadmap, as you all know, with the application process and auditioning for schools, which is unlike normal liberal arts schools that you have to go and audition and write letters and get letters of recommendation and figure out which schools to go to and whether you get a major in music and what's the difference between a conservatory and just a regular school offering a major in music. Just this whole complicated thing that is very difficult to understand. I as a non-musician, to me, it's a total mystery to me, and I learned a lot just by watching these two ladies write this book. I wrote the part of the book on because kids need to audition, of teaching kids how to audition and spend their time before the audition and what to do to set up a good audition so they get accepted. But there's so much more involved, and Annie and Kathy lay out everything, including financial aid, how to apply, what's the differences between schools, what's the best school for you, just this amazing amount of information that's now offered. And in addition to this, I've got an assessment, just like I have assessments for musicians of how they perform under pressure or how they learn skills. I've got an assessment for high school kids to test them in how they're set up to prepare for getting to music school, how they are at applying, how are they at writing skills, writing letters, how are the practice habits, how are their musical skills, how are their auditioning skills. And I've got an assessment for this so the kid can determine online by taking this assessment where he or she stands and what they need to do to get better to make it more likely that they get into the conservatory music school of their choice. And this is a book, it's online. We've got our own website we just opened up called collegeprepformusicians.com. The assessments are on there, the book's on there. We're very thrilled about it. I personally thought the book was going to be done in 6 months, and it's done now in 3 years, and it's awesome.
It looks great, and I love that assessment's up there front and center. And your assessments over the years, whether it's from performance success or from past online projects, I've just found those so helpful. And you've got so many other both assessments and other resources on winningonstage.com, right? That's the home base for the majority of your projects right now. Tell us about that.
Well, it's the website. We've also been working on it. It's been recently upgraded. It's Winning on Stage, and it's for performing artists. We have assessments for how to accelerate the learning process, again, how to perform under pressure. We have online courses. We have a centering course that they can learn how to center, how to master the centering process through a series of progressive steps. We've got a workbook, videos, and audios that accompany. So if people are interested in upgrading their mental game, this is the way to do it, through the website.
And they can check out your TED video that John and I were talking about earlier. It's super cool. It's the most beautiful, clear description of the myelinization and some great tactics about how to practice effectively, frequent repetitions, breaks, all that kind of good stuff. Love the blog posts you've got up on the site too. There's a great one on meditation and centering and how they differ, and I found that really interesting. So both John and I, I'm sure, just appreciate what you do. And it's exciting to see these new projects coming. And it was great to chat with you. I think it was back in 2017. So it's been almost 2 years since we've been on the line. But it's keep up the good work. And just thanks again for taking some time.
You're very welcome, Jason. Really enjoyed it. Enjoyed everything. John, thanks again. It's always great to talk with you.
Thank you, Don. Same here, man. Have a great day. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. All the best.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, John. So great to chat with both of you again. And I love, like I said in the opening, I love having guests back multiple times. So I'm sure we'll have Don back on sometime soon. He's always up to a new project. Great guy, so many insights. And I just want to thank him personally for all the insight he's given me into auditioning and practicing and just getting better. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring. If you're looking for a double bass, Mitch is making them, and they're beautiful down in the Dallas area. Learn more at mitchmooring.com. Thank you also to Krista Copper, who is our podcast librarian, going through and cataloging and organizing everything we talk about. So helpful moving forward. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.